Thanks so much for inviting me back. And I'm wearing exactly the same clothes as 2 years ago when I was here before, because I checked on the photo, and I am. So it's great to be back, but it's obviously a really sad day after what happened yesterday, and so to talk about radical ideas and the value of radical ideas and the risks of radical ideas today's is quite difficult. And I already cancelled one talk because I didn't really want to I just wasn't feeling up for it. I just didn't want to talk about it because this book is about why radical thinking is important, but obviously there's limits to that, and there's limits to how far radical thinking is valuable in a democracy. But it's really important that we don't let violent Islamists define what radical means in society, because there's so much more about why and how people outside of the mainstream offer new ways of thinking about how we live together. And that's my definition of radicalism, really. It's a book based on 18 months of spending time living with, following around a series of completely different groups, all of whom reject the way that we live now, who want to see fundamental change in society, who live outside what some social scientists call the Overton window, this sort of set of ideas that you have to sign up to essentially get yourself elected. Assumptions about welfare, about foreign policy, about domestic policy that basically centre-left and centre-right politicians have more or less for 25 years all signed up to, and there's a very small window of disagreement. And these people, in my book, Radicals, are those that live outside of that. And it's, to me, the reason I wrote this book, the reason I went on this journey, partly after I wrote The Darknet, I was very interested in fringe groups and what society can learn from fringe groups. The kind of argument that, and as history shows, all of the norms, the common wisdoms that we now take for granted and accept to be completely normal and rational and obvious were once upon a time derided as being dangerous and foolish radicalism. And that is going to be the case again in the future. People will look back on our generation and our age and say, those ridiculous ideas they had about how to run society. And some of the people in this book, not by no means all of them, maybe even none of them, will one day be mainstream in a sense. They will be the ideas that people of the future take for granted as normal. So I wanted to see, what are those possible fringe ideas of today that might become the mainstream ideas of tomorrow? And the reason I wanted to do that is because for a decade, I've worked for a political think tank. And that political think tank, Demos, it's called, was founded 30 years ago with the goal of improving people's confidence, trust, and involvement in politics. The idea in the early 90s that people weren't any more engaged in ordinary politics and we had to do something. So by every measure, we at Demos have utterly failed in that task. The early 90s, when we were founded, now seems to be a golden age of political engagement. So we've utterly failed. And I'm sure you've seen the statistics. I'm sure you've seen these stats, because you hear them all the time now. This is one that's really terrifying, which is the percentage of people that believe it is essential to live in a democracy by decade of birth. And you can just see from the 30s to the 1980s, the direction is pretty apparent. People are actually losing confidence in democracy as an idea. Less than half in most of these places believe it's... And I don't know what they're suggesting we replace it with, but people don't believe in democracy itself. And the other stats, I won't read them out, you can read them for yourself, but you must have seen them. Declining trust in the media, in the justice system, in our members of parliament, all heading downwards. And yes, while everyone at the moment is maybe concerned by the populist right, this insurgency of the populist right, there are many other types of radical political movements on the move as well. And a lot of those are the ones that I wanted to look at. And I'm going to start where I started in the book, which was with the transhumanists, which is where I ended the last book. So it really like linked together nicely. Does anyone either know what transhumanism is, or is anyone a transhumanist? Oh, thank God. All right, fine. You are, maybe. You did. All right, so you know. So I'll give you the one-line definition, which is transhumanists are people who believe that we can use science and technology to radically improve, maybe even change, human capabilities, intellectual and physical. We can use technology to have bionic limbs and throw a football 500 meters. We can put artificial intelligence chips in our brain and become 100 times smarter. We can use life extension technology to potentially end aging entirely. So there's a belief that we can use technology to minimize suffering and improve human well-being with no limits on what that might mean. That's transhumanism. So about right before I started writing this book, I was approached by a guy called Zoltan, which is a perfect name for a transhumanist, and it really actually is his name, who told me that he would be running for president. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And he said, but I'm not just running for president. I am going to have a 3-month tour of the US for my campaign. And the pitch to the American people is going to be vote for me and you can live forever. And I'm going to drive this bus, which I'm going to repurpose to look like a huge coffin on wheels to highlight the lack of government research in anti-aging technology from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., where I'm going to bang on the wall of the Capitol building a transhumanist Bill of Rights, talking about replacing the military-industrial complex with a scientific one to end aging in a generation, to give cyborgs rights, and so on and so on. Here's his crowdfunding webpage for Indiegogo, and he raised all the money, $27,000. And you know what? I've got a little video, just so you can see, which I think is going to work. Here it is.
Hi, my name is Zoltan Istvan, and I'm the 2016 U.S. presidential candidate of the Transhumanist Party, and I am going to be driving a 40-foot coffin bus across America promoting transhumanism and life extension. It's something that's going to work. It's something that's going to wake up America and get people thinking that perhaps we don't have to die. Perhaps we can use science and technology to overcome our biological mortality. The Immortality Bus is a wild idea to traverse the United States, hopefully getting people to think about using science and technology to overcome aging, to overcome death, and to embrace transhumanism. We're going to have campaign drones, we're going to have a robot, we're going to have virtual reality gear on board, we're going to hopefully have a biohacking lab on board. I mean, it's going to be crazy fun stuff. Please support the Immortality Bus, please support my campaign, and let's hope this 40-foot coffin bus can turn into a big success and really get people thinking about how we can use science and technology better in our lives.
There's the transhumanist. I mean, look. You saw that video, yeah? How cool did that look? Didn't that look amazing? And as a journalist, he sends this video to me, and I'm thinking, I am so going on that bus. Because this is a guy, and he's traveling across America saying, vote for me and you'll live forever, on a 1977 Wanderlodge bus with drones and transhumanists. This is amazing. So I turn up to his house the day that this is going to launch, expecting loads of transhumanists. No transhumanists, loads of journalists. Because journalists loved this. And Zoltan knew that journalists would love this. Because he realized that for a journalist, the opportunity of writing this long, thoughtful, contradictory story about a transhumanist traveling across America on an old bus was catnip for us. It's beautiful, it's perfect. And so with the other journalists, we traveled across America. Now I'm going to come to the conclusion of that story in a second, but there is me on the transhumanist bus with some other journalists. And there is me with Zoltan when he got a chip implant, an RFID chip implant into his little, whatever you call that bit there, at a biohacking lab in Central California, which he could use to open doors and unlock his phone. The only problem was it only worked on a Samsung and he had an iPhone, so it didn't work. But it didn't matter because we were covering it and there's a microphone from other journalists. Two things about Zoltan that I want to say. The first is that all the things that he was talking about in 2014, 15, as he was running for president, and he did this tour, he went all the way, he ended up in Washington, just like he said, is the things he was talking about, to me, sounded absolutely ridiculous. He was saying that very soon, machine learning artificial intelligence is going to start replacing more and more jobs, including middle-class jobs, and what on earth are we going to do? And we need to have some form of universal basic income to ensure that society as we know it continues. And I was like, what a load of rubbish. Fast forward 2 years, and this is all I'm ever hearing now, that actually machine learning artificial intelligence is going to start replacing swathes of jobs, not routine jobs, complex jobs, doctors, solicitors. And actually, as a society, we need to really think about what that means. And it took a man in a coffin bus to say that. No other politician talks about any of this stuff. He was. And the same with life extension technology. He's saying within 20 years, we could easily live for another 20 years longer, maybe 30 years. And in 100 years' time, who knows? Now, imagine if we just increased life expectancy to 140. Every single treasury figure about welfare and health would be thrown out the window and we'd have to start again. Google and other Silicon Valley companies are investing millions and millions of dollars into radical life extension technology. And serious scientists now think that it's actually going to be possible within a decade to extend our life expectancy by at least 5 or 10 years. And it was this crazy guy that was actually saying that stuff. And this is why radical thinking has such great value in society. They're thinking a little further ahead than the rest of us and forcing the rest of us to think about what this means. Now, the second thing about Mr. Istvan was that he understood the power of a coffin bus for journalists. He understood that in a busy media environment where we are constantly surrounded by all sorts of political stories, increasingly we want to see the most exciting and the most outlandish one there is, the most emotional one, the most unusual one. It's about shareability. And he understood that because Zoltan Istvan's campaign, which was utterly ludicrous, we can all agree that he never was going to get elected. He knew he was never going to get elected. He knew he was never going to end up on a state ballot, much less get elected, was covered by every single major media outlet that I can think of. BBC covered it. There's The Guardian. This is an amazing piece in The Verge. The New Yorker. The New Yorker, right? Is there a better magazine than The New Yorker? Salon, and on and on and on. So here's the kicker. Zoltan was running as candidate for the transhumanist party, as reported by every single one of these outlets. The problem is, the transhumanist party did not actually exist. He'd made it up. And in so doing, he broke Federal Electoral Commission rules. It is illegal to say you are running as a candidate for a political party if that party does not exist. It is illegal to raise money saying you are the leader of a political party if that political party does not exist. Zoltan was doing both of those things. He set up a political action committee and called it the Transhumanist Party and ran as an independent. Now, that may not seem like a big difference, but in Federal Electoral Commission terms, it's a massive difference. One's illegal and one's not illegal. Did anybody from any of these outlets check any of that? Did the BBC check? Did the New Yorker check? Did the Guardian check? Did I check? No. No one checked. Nobody checked whether there was even such a legal entity as the Transhumanist Party. And the reason is that it was so exciting for us journalists to be involved in this amazing madcap tour that we didn't want to check. We didn't want to know. I didn't check. Someone got in touch with me and said, have you seen this? It's a petition by some other transhumanists that are really pissed off that Zoltan claims to be running a transhumanist party that doesn't technically exist. And I dug into the story and found out that he had, in fact, and I confronted him, and he was like, okay, I made it up. I didn't really have a party. But the Transhumanist Party is a revolutionary party, and every single party that's ever succeeded has always been a revolutionary party. And you know what? Zoltan outsmarted all of us. He outsmarted all of us journalists because he knew that we would be too drawn to the story. And he brought the message of transhumanism, which was so incredibly niche, so incredibly small, to millions of people that would never have heard of transhumanism. And when you're a tiny little upstart movement like that, that is what you need. Bold people who will take risks to get the message out to millions of people. It's a transhumanist. It's not happy. And that's what happened. So that's the story of Zoltan and the Transhumanist Party. One both where the journalists lost the plot because it was such a brilliant escapade, and an example of how those crazy fringe movements sometimes actually have a point. Right, I want to show you a second story. Could I have my volunteer back up for a second, please? Because I'm going to do a little live demonstration. It's like an interim. It's really two stories, this, but one's an interim. And it's about Tommy Robinson, who's former leader of the English Defence League. Okay. Could you just pull up that Twitter thing there? You see that there? Oh, God. Could you just stop that? See, there they go again.
That's the next video.
Oh, yeah, you could stop that. Yeah, make it stop. And if I just want that one up, that tab up. This is a dangerous live demonstration. So this is Tommy Robinson's live Twitter account. Now, do you people know who this man is? You might recognize the face. He's the leader of the he was the leader and founder of the English Defence League, a kind of anti-Islam group that for 4 or 5 years went around to streets and city centres doing demonstrations, often highly offensive and inflammatory, about the role of Islam in society. Now, over the course of 12 months, I followed Tommy Robinson as he tried to set up a new political movement that he said would be a respectable version of the English Defence League, a kind of middle-class English Defence League that would... You can sit down. Oh, no, can you not sit down? Can you wait? Thank you. I owe you a drink. That would appeal to the middle classes. He thought the problem with the English Defence League was that it became... People were drunk too often and, you know, just no one took it seriously because of the offensive chanting and the meanness and the cruelty. So he wanted to create a sensible version. And he looked at Germany and he saw a movement in Germany called Pegida that seemed to be a more respectable version where people were demonstrating once a week, calmly, sober, without violence, and he wanted to set up an equivalent, Pegida UK, and I followed him for 12 months while he did that. And you know what? It was successful. It was successful. I went to some Pegida UK demonstrations, and there was no drinking, there was no offensive chanting, there was no fighting, and there was no people. Because those are the reasons that his supporters used to turn up on Saturdays to go demonstrating. It was a social event. It was fun and it was thrilling to be involved in a movement that got into trouble with the police and with anti-fascists and so on. So I tell that story in the book, and I don't want to go into all the details except for one thing. What is it like to be constantly surrounded by the same information all the time? And we've heard a lot about echo chambers and filter bubbles and the way that we create our own little universes of information. And groups like the English Defence League have been incredibly good at creating these bubbles of information. Better than almost any other group that I've seen. And Tommy Robinson, as you can see, is a very well-followed individual on Twitter. He's like a connected millennial, really, who tweets all the time, followed by lots and lots of people. And as you can see, this is a live demo, so I don't know what you're going to see, so apologies in advance. But what I just want to show you is the sort of content that you see when you're part of this group, because they create very tight networks of supporters that all share the same stories over and over. And the effect that that has on you when you have seen nothing but this over and over and over again for 5 or 6 years, which is how long these guys have been around and on social media. And we talk about the filter bubble and the echo chamber, but you don't feel it until you're in it. And it's a really good exercise to spend. I'm not going to spend hours here, don't worry, but I just want to show you the sorts of things that they share, and it will give you a small insight into what they think and what they believe. Here we go. Here's the risky bit. Let's see. Okay. Tommy Robinson was recently not sent to prison for a charge that I can't tell you much about, but I was in the courtroom, actually. And he was found guilty of this charge, but Tommy Robinson and his supporters view every single thing through the prism of us versus an establishment that are too afraid to speak the truth. So they have positioned themselves, and you will have seen that in the response to yesterday's attacks. They've positioned themselves as brave and bold anti-establishment campaigners who speak truth to power about what's really going on, and everybody else is a coward who dare not speak the truth. And when he gets into court, and he has been in court an awful lot, it's always pitched as him versus the establishment. Now you'll find, and I don't know what he's sharing here, the same themes come up, and it's not always about Islam, but it's so often about the toleration that the police had towards grooming. This has been one of the themes that they have been talking about for years, that there's a problem with grooming gangs in places like Oldham or Rochdale. No one said anything apart from them, and they said it first, and that proves they are the only people that were ever honest enough to speak the truth. Again and again and again. And you will see that the sources that they take are not conspiracy theory sites. There are some of those, but they're often from mainstream media outlets, respected places. And they're able to pick and choose different things from different sources, package them all together, and it creates a really compelling narrative of the West being under threat from Islam, and they're the only ones brave enough to stand up for it and defend it. And that is how they see themselves. That's not how everybody else sees them, and that's not how they always behave. But that is their self-perception, and it is bolstered by an endless run of shared stories. I'll give you just a couple of other ones, and then we'll move on. It's very emotional stuff. And it is like this day after day it's been for years and years and years. There you go. I mean, that one kind of sums it up maybe better than ever. They really believe they're the only people. You can't read it. Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, I'm so close to it. No, I'm not exploiting terror for my own gains. I'm banging my head against the wall saying I have been warning about this for 13 years now. 5,000 retweets. So that was 6 hours ago. If your first cause for concern is fake Islamophobia reports rather than the victims and their families, you are part of the problem. 1.8 thousand retweets. And this is what you get over and over and over again. So, for example, when many of us perhaps, we saw stuff being shared on social media and not wanting to speculate or not wanting to sort of inflame, stay quiet. Don't start talking about who was responsible and why until things have kind of settled, maybe. That is taken as proof by some of these people that we're cowards, that we dare not speak the truth. And I just, again, wanted you to kind of think about what it's like to have done that for years and years and years. And you can begin to see the effect of this echo chamber, this filter bubble that you always hear about, what it's actually like. Right, I'll move on from that, and then you can sit down. So then you can switch back. And this is the final story. How are we doing for time, Joe? Yeah. How long have I got? 10 minutes. Perfect. Perfect. This is the final story. And it's not about psychedelics, and it's not about polyamorous love. We can talk about those maybe after the break, because I did spend time in those as well. But the final chapter, and the one that I think really shook me up the most, was this one about Liberland. Has anyone ever heard of Liberland? You're also the transhumanist guy. Yeah. You know the.
I read about the libertarian stuff as well.
Perfect.
He's actually 350 years old.
In the 1890s.
Brilliant.
That little strip of land has been.
Right, exactly right. So there is a very, this is Croatia and this is Serbia. This is the border between them, is basically the Danube River. Now, 7 square kilometers along that border is disputed territory. And it is one of the only bits of the world that is unclaimed by a nation state. One of the only parcels of land unclaimed by a sovereign nation state. Because Serbia says it belongs to Croatia, and Croatia says it belongs to Serbia. That's not how it usually works, is it? And the reason is, and you can kind of see it on this graph, after the War of Independence that Croatia fought against Serbia, the de facto border was the Danube River. But Croatia wanted it to be the 19th century course of the Danube River, which would put loads of Serbian land inside Croatia, but this tiny bit of land inside Serbia. So Croatia says this is the border. Serbia says, no, we're good, thanks. We'd like the border as it is. And as a result, this tiny little patch of land is one of the only bits of the world, apart from the Arctic and a few bits in the Saharan desert, that's unclaimed by a nation state. And under international law, the first person that turns up at an unclaimed bit of land and declares it an independent nation state gets to keep it, which was this man. And the first lady of Liberland, Reg Lecture, a libertarian, 30 years old, from the Czech Republic, who on Thomas Jefferson's birthday anniversary in 2015 turned up at Liberland, stuck his flag in the ground and said, we are going to become the Free Republic of Liberland, the first truly libertarian country in the world where we have voluntary taxation, so no taxes at all, except for those which you agree to pay with other people when you can commission services from private service providers, including roads and schools and security and everything. No restrictions whatsoever on what you put with your body, in your body, or what you do with your body, or what you say, or what you own. And 200,000 people signed up for citizenship almost immediately, thinking this is a perfect libertarian paradise. And I went to the 1-year anniversary to celebrate the founding of Liberland. And it really got me thinking about a nation state. Imagine everybody, I mean, the notion of a nation state, i.e., that kind of, the nation meaning a group of people who share some characteristics on an area of land and a state which has sovereignty over that bit of land, is a really new idea. It's really only a couple of 100 years old. Before that, there were lots of different ways in which people lived together. But now the nation-state has a complete monopoly over how we live. There's no alternative to living in a nation-state. And imagine all of us in this room decided that we're adults and we would like to create our own little nation of sorts. And we'll set our own rules. And we won't receive anything from the UK government. We don't want any services from them. But we also don't want to pay taxes to them or follow their rules. The consent of the governed. you know, the idea of what democracy is about. You cannot do that. And you cannot do that anywhere in the world. And the idea of Liberland was you could do it here. We could get together and agree to commission our own services inside Liberland and do whatever the hell we liked. So I turned up. And it really got me thinking this. Like, wow, nation state, yeah, I've always assumed it's just a fact of nature, but it's not. It's an invention. It's a man-made invention. And to become a nation state, all you really have to do is convince other nation states that you are a nation state. It's an oligarchy. I mean, it's a cartel. If other nation states recognize you, you are a nation state. So VIT wants to be recognized as a nation state, albeit a radically different one, which means he has to behave like a nation state. And so I turn up to this conference, and it's literally like walking into a sort of a nation in waiting. Everyone's a minister. They have a minister for finance. They have a minister of the treasury. They have a minister for foreign affairs. They have a representative to Israel, a representative to Pakistan. Everything that you imagine a nation state has, they have created, even though they are not allowed to step foot on Liberland. We held the conference just here, over here. Because when we tried to get on there, the Croatian police stopped us. And they blocked all the roads in. Because they're really pissed off with VIT, because they think he is confusing their border dispute with Serbia. So, everything. So here's their little glossy brochure about Liberland, what it's going to be like. You've got a constitution. They have a football team. They have an aeroplane. They have a national beer, which I've tried. They have a wine. And when I was in the conference, they were holding an architectural competition for architects that had designed what Liberland would look like once nation states had recognized it. There's some of the entries. Absolutely beautiful. I think this one was the winning entry. You know, and I really loved this because I was like, wow, it's a kind of, at last, it's a blank slate to actually imagine how we would design a society with modern technology if we could start again now, rather than based on an existing nation-state model from 150 years ago. When we actually got to Liberland, it actually looks like that. So I don't know if you can see the difference there. But that's it. And VIT is absolutely convinced that this year, keep an eye out for this, that this year, nations around the world will start recognizing Liberland. They'll begin to believe in it. And once they do, others will too. And then before you know it, Liberland will come to life somehow. And I would love it if it did. Because, and this is the kind of wrap-up argument, if you like. I don't believe, you may disagree with me, I don't believe when I look at the challenges that are coming down the line in modern liberal societies, combination of climate change, mass movement of people, the technological problems that Zoltan pointed out about automation, artificial intelligence, the fiscal crunch that society is going to face as our population ages, that our centre-left and centre-right politics are really fit to deal with those challenges. And I don't know what the answers are, but different experiments in living, that's what John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, always said. We need experiments in living, different ways of trying to live, hence the polyamorous commune. Different ways of trying to live, because we never know what types of ideas or philosophies we may need to draw on one day. And even if you disagree with them, and even if you think Tommy Robinson's an awful man, Liberland is a pipe dream, and transhumanism is 20 years too soon, there's a great value in radical ideas in modern society, because they force you to think. They force you to wonder what it is that you care about, what you value in society. And the great danger in democracies is that we end up with a kind of consensus, a dogma, of a handful of commonly received wisdoms that are unquestionable and unchallenged. And radicals, even where you disagree with them, force you to think for yourself. And given all the challenges we face, I think that is the most important thing now for citizens, to imagine something different. Because just like Liberland, if you can't imagine it first, then it's never going to happen. All I know is this. I don't know whether these guys are right or wrong, but I do know that the politics of tomorrow, of 20 years, 50 years, 100 years' time, history says it will be very different from that of today. And we don't know quite what it's going to be, but we need to imagine it first, and radicals can help us to do that. And with that, I'll stop and let you get some food. Thank you for listening.